Hi everyone, welcome. And today, we're diving into another chilling story, one that leaves a lingering sense of horror long after you hear it. January
Almost ready to deliver
1999.
woman.
David and Belinda Temple were eagerly awaiting the arrival of their second child. Belinda, nearing the end of her pregnancy, was exhausted, not just from the relentless demands of carrying life within her, but also from the ceaseless care required by her young son, Evan. The doctors had predicted that labor could come in just a couple of weeks, yet the heavy anticipation weighed on her every moment. On this day, seeing the fatigue etched into his wife's face, David decided to give her a reprieve. He took charge of household chores and offered her a chance for an evening of rest. To keep Belinda undisturbed, he whisked Evan away for a walk in the crisp winter air. Father and son wandered through the park, laughing and teasing each other, a temporary reprieve from the weight of family life. The chill of the evening invigorated them, sharpening their appetites, so they stopped by a local cafe for a quick bite, a sandwich, and a Coke before returning home. But as David approached the house, a gut-wrenching sight froze him in place. The front door was shattered, shards of glass glinting ominously on the ground. Evan tugged at his hand. "Mom?" he asked, barely able to keep pace, his small voice trembling with confusion. David, caught between panic and instinct, murmured, "Mum's in the hospital right now," a feeble excuse that barely made sense even to himself. Without hesitation, he led his son across the street to the Harlans, family friends whose warm, familiar home seemed a sanctuary amid the rising storm of dread. Quentin Harland opened the door, astonishment frozen on his face. Before a word could be exchanged, David ushered Evan into the living room and sprinted back toward his own house. "What's happening?" Quentin shouted, a knot of fear tightening in his chest. But the scene that awaited them was beyond comprehension. The house was a chaotic wreck, closets flung open, belongings scattered across the floor, and streaks of dark, congealed blood snaking up the stairs. In the dressing room beneath the staircase, Belinda lay face down, arms outstretched, a horrific wound at the back of her head marking the brutality of the attack. David, seemingly paralyzed by shock, neither cried nor called her name. He did not rush to her side. Instead, he reached for his cell phone and dialed the police with a numb efficiency. The operator's calm instructions to check her pulse, to perform CPR, met David's silent horror with disbelief. "CPR?" he muttered. Her head, its words failing him as the gruesome reality of the murder slammed into his chest. Police arrived swiftly, yet the scene resisted their intrusion. The Temple family's bull terrier, Shaq, snarled and lunged, a formidable guardian unwilling to let strangers pass. One officer even drew his sidearm. But David's voice cut through the tension, commanding the officers to lower their weapons while he corralled the aggressive dog into the garage. Once inside, the officers surveyed the house with growing unease. Their instincts whispered the impossible. This was not the work of ordinary burglars. Items had been upturned, yet nothing of value had been stolen. The dog, the brutality of the attack, the precise targeting of Belinda, it all suggested something far more sinister than a random crime. Tracing back, Belinda's story painted a life of determination and heartbreak. Born in 1966, she pursued a college education in her hometown, even as her twin sister Brenda moved away to study at Stephen F. Austin University. Belinda had been fiercely independent, a trait that had defined much of her early life. Her high school romance with Marshall Kelmy, a man 3 years her senior, had been passionate but fraught with familial opposition. Her parents feared that the relationship would derail her education and entangle her in early domestic life. Yet Belinda, unyielding, announced her intention to marry Marshall, a declaration that plunged family dinners into silence. The marriage itself was understated. A borrowed dress, a few friends, champagne shared in the quiet streets of her hometown. Belinda left her parents' home, seeking independence, yet the marriage dissolved within months when Marshall's infidelity became apparent. She returned to her family, heartbroken but resolute. By 1998, she was pregnant with her first child and working part-time at a local school, where her sense of fairness and devotion commanded both respect and fear from the children she taught. Belinda's integrity could not tolerate neglect. When one student, Riley Joe Sanders, skipped months of school, she took it upon herself to confront the situation directly, visiting his mother and ensuring accountability. Even then, threats were whispered, ominous hints that her vigilance had not gone unnoticed. Life at university had been a refuge. After leaving Marshall behind, Belinda followed her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University, where she thrived academically and as a basketball coach. It was there she met David Temple, a charismatic, talented soccer coach whose aggressive temperament on the field masked a softer, adoring side when he was with her. His parents adored her instantly, seeing in Belinda a kindred spirit whose love for sports mirrored their own. Yet those closest to Belinda sensed a disturbing transformation. Once fiercely independent and confident, she became quieter, constrained, her life increasingly
Almost ready to
revolving
deliver
around pleasing
woman.
David. The couple married soon after graduation and adopted the bull terrier, Shaq, their family now seemingly complete. By 1999, the idyllic image fractured under the weight of deception and mounting tension. David's attention had shifted to a new relationship with a co-worker, Heather Scott, and his cruelty toward Belinda intensified. Though he never raised his hand, his words cut deep, ridiculing her body, her appearance, her very presence, even before guests. Belinda internalized the abuse, crying herself to sleep, feeling trapped in a life that had promised love
This was
but delivered humiliation. Meanwhile, the household, poised to welcome another child, relied entirely on her effort, shopping, painting, assembling furniture, all while David remained absent, immersed in his clandestine affair. And yet, the day of the tragedy began innocuously enough. David, attempting to provide an alibi, took Evan for a walk through the park, stopping at a cafe, returning home unaware, or pretending to be, of the storm awaiting him behind the shattered front door. Inside, the house stood as both stage and evidence, a scene of violence meticulously orchestrated yet curiously untouched by theft. A single question lingered in the minds of investigators. Could a random criminal, even armed, navigate the ferocity of Shaq and the deliberate chaos, committing such a brutal act with such precision? The investigation into Belinda Temple's murder stretched on with an intensity that gripped the community in disbelief and fear. The police, initially baffled by the seeming randomness and brutality of the act, began to untangle the threads that hinted at something far more personal than a burglary gone wrong. The house, left in a chaotic tableau, bore the hallmarks of a staged crime scene, yet there was an unsettling precision to the violence, a sense that someone had planned each detail with cold calculation. The presence of the bull terrier, Shaq, who had protected the house so fiercely, compounded the mystery. Any intruder would have had to confront an animal trained and fiercely loyal, yet the perpetrator seemed unaffected by the dog's growls and snapping teeth. The glass at the front door, broken in a manner inconsistent with a forced entry, suggested someone intimately familiar with the house's layout and the routines of its inhabitants. The officers who surveyed the scene began to consider an uncomfortable possibility. This was not the work of a random criminal, but of someone who knew Belinda, someone who could manipulate the environment to construct an alibi that would seem perfectly natural. The past, as it often does in tragedies of this magnitude, revealed more than anyone could have anticipated. Belinda's life had been a mosaic of resilience and heartache, her determination to carve out a meaningful existence for herself evident in every decision she had made. From defying her parents' expectations and marrying Marshall Kelmy in her own defiance, to enduring the betrayal that ended that marriage so quickly, Belinda had shown strength and independence that had won her admiration among her peers and respect from the children she taught. Her dedication as a teacher went beyond the classroom. She fought for students who had no one else to advocate for them, ensuring that even those from the most difficult circumstances were held accountable and given a chance to succeed. Yet even such unwavering commitment could not shield her from the personal betrayals and emotional assaults that defined her relationship with David Temple. The story of their courtship, once filled with the excitement of youthful passion and shared devotion to sport, had taken a darker turn, revealing a relationship that became increasingly toxic over the years. David, once charming and attentive, had transformed into a man whose love was conditional, whose affections came with a sharp edge of control and insult. The isolation Belinda experienced, distancing herself from friends and family, became a silent echo of the power David wielded, and the community that had once admired their union began to sense the cracks, the tensions that lay hidden behind polite smiles and public appearances. As the police delved into the neighborhood's history of burglaries, Riley Joe Sanders, a student who had once threatened Belinda and whose erratic presence in her classroom had caused concern, emerged as a suspect. 8 days before the murder, a home nearby had been broken into, and Riley's proximity, age, and access to his father's 12-gauge shotgun made him an obvious person of interest. Yet as questioning unfolded, Riley's alibi unraveled, revealing that on the day of the murder, he had indeed been elsewhere, hiding his presence with friends and evading attention. His father's gun, the potential murder weapon, could not be located, and the narrative that Riley had intended to confront Belinda, almost executing a reckless plan, thwarted only by the vigilant Shaq, only later came to light. Though it initially redirected suspicion, the evidence ultimately shifted back towards someone intimately familiar with the household, someone capable of crafting a scenario in which the murder could occur while maintaining an appearance of normalcy to the outside world. Every moment of that day, from David taking Evan for a walk to the meticulous chaos left inside the house, now appeared less like coincidence and more like premeditated strategy, designed to establish an airtight alibi and manipulate perception. By 1999, the pressure on David's
Almost
persona
ready to
and the
deliver
cracks in his alibi
woman.
were becoming increasingly apparent. His public image as a devoted husband and father had masked the complexity and darkness of his private actions, yet those closest to Belinda could recount a transformation that spoke volumes. The man who once carried her in his arms on the soccer field had become one whose affection was conditional, who mocked and demeaned her in the safety of their home, and whose attentions had strayed to another woman, Heather Scott. As investigators combed through the timelines, the intimate betrayals and the emotional manipulation that Belinda had endured took on a new significance. Testimonies emerged about David's boasts, moments in which he spoke of how easily he could replace a pregnant, vulnerable wife with someone young and beautiful, a chilling insight into his mindset and the potential motive behind a crime that had seemed initially inexplicable. The notion that a man could plot the demise of his spouse, orchestrating a scene designed to confuse and mislead, became increasingly plausible as detectives pieced together his actions, his absences, and the carefully constructed alibi of a park visit with his young son. The case, however, did not immediately reach resolution. Years passed, with David maintaining innocence in the face of mounting suspicion. The murder weapon remained elusive, hidden or discarded in a manner that left the police with circumstantial evidence and an uneasy reliance on testimonies and behavioral analysis. David's relationship with Heather, initially dismissed as casual, became a focal point in the prosecution's arguments. The notion that he would kill for the prospect of a new love, combined with his long-standing pattern of emotional cruelty, framed the narrative that Belinda's murder was not random, but intentional. Witnesses recounted his behavior during her pregnancy, his apparent indifference, and his opportunistic exploitation of her vulnerability, constructing a profile of a man capable of orchestrating a brutal act in pursuit of personal desire. As the legal proceedings dragged on, public interest remained high, a testament to the shock and complexity of a crime that intertwined domestic life, betrayal, and cold-blooded violence in a way that left no observer unmoved. In 2007, the case reached its dramatic apex. David Temple, long shielded by appearances of normalcy and the passage of time, was finally brought to trial. The courtroom became a stage for the culmination of years of investigation, emotional testimony, and painstaking reconstruction of events. Evidence, carefully compiled over nearly a decade, painted a portrait of a man whose meticulous planning, intimate knowledge of his home and family, and willingness to exploit those around him had led to the death of his wife. Testimonies from colleagues, friends, and even the revelations about Riley Sanders's failed burglary attempt reinforced the idea that the murder was deliberate, executed by someone with access, motive, and opportunity. Heather Scott's statements, initially ambiguous and confusing to the jury, only deepened the sense of intrigue and moral complexity. Was she shielding a man she loved, or speaking truthfully about a relationship that had never held the intensity the prosecution alleged? The ambiguity of human relationships, the shifting loyalties, and the hidden desires that had underpinned the events of January 1999 all converged in the courtroom, demanding deliberation, moral judgment, and a confrontation with the darkest facets of human behavior. Even after the verdict, the ripples of the case continued to affect those connected to the tragedy. In 2009, the confession of Riley Sanders's friend reopened questions of motive, intent, and proximity to the crime. The acknowledgement that Riley had accessed the shotgun, intended to confront his former teacher, and narrowly avoided a catastrophic mistake, injected new layers of complexity into an already tangled web. Legal reviews and appeals, the shifting testimonies, and the slow march of justice over years painted a picture of a system grappling with both human error and human malice. Throughout it all, David Temple's life became emblematic of the intersections between desire, betrayal, and punishment. Released temporarily on bail, divorced from Heather, living with the weight of public scrutiny and personal guilt, and yet still confronted with the consequences of a crime whose reverberations could not be contained. Finally, after decades of investigation, legal maneuvering, and emotional upheaval, the case reached its final resolution in 2023. David Temple was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, albeit with the possibility of parole, marking the conclusion of a story that had spanned more than 20 years. Evan, who had clung to the belief in his father's innocence throughout the trial, was forced to reconcile with the reality that shattered his childhood perceptions, navigating the duality of love for a parent and the horror of their actions. The community, scarred by the loss and fascinated by the intricacy of the crime, bore witness to the lasting consequences of betrayal, premeditation, and the fragile illusions of family and trust. Belinda Temple's life, filled with courage, compassion, and dedication, remained a touchstone for those who remembered her, a reminder that even in the face of calculated evil, the integrity and humanity of the victim endure beyond the violence inflicted. The tragedy of that winter day, the subsequent unraveling of lives,
Almost ready to
and the
deliver
ultimate assertion of
woman.
justice stand as a stark testament to the complexities of human behavior, the persistence of truth, and the inexorable pursuit of accountability, leaving a narrative that is both harrowing and compelling, a story that resonates long after the final verdict has been rendered.